Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now before I begin, tell me where you are watching from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. The day my nephew arrived, everything felt ordinary at first, almost too ordinary. I remember standing by my kitchen counter, rinsing off a bowl of blueberries, when I heard his car door shut outside. It was a soft, familiar sound, the kind that blends into a quiet afternoon without disrupting it. I'm a woman in my mid-50s, and life has a way of settling into predictable rhythms at this age. But that afternoon, something in the air felt different, even before I understood why. He walked in with that gentle smile of his, carrying a small bag and wearing a look I couldn't quite read. It wasn't sadness, but it wasn't joy either. More like someone who had been holding something inside for a long time. We hugged, the kind of warm family greeting that always eased my heart. He had grown in ways I hadn't fully noticed during the months he'd been busy with his life, more thoughtful in his movements, more aware, almost as if he had stepped into a new version of himself since our last visit. We sat in the living room with the windows slightly open, letting in the late afternoon breeze. The curtains shifted slowly, brushing against each other like they were whispering secrets. He told me about work, the long hours, the challenges he never mentioned to the rest of the family. I listened, watching the way he fidgeted with the sleeve of his shirt, realizing he wasn't just catching me up, he was working up to something. I made us tea, the kind with a soft, calming aroma that fills the room without trying too hard. When I brought it over, he was staring at the framed photo on the shelf, the one of him as a child sitting on my lap with his missing front teeth and that wide grin. I saw a quiet smile appear on his face as he looked at it. When he turned back to me, his eyes held a depth I wasn't used to seeing. "You always made me feel safe," he said, almost like he wasn't speaking to me, but to the memory of that little boy in the photo. His voice had a softness that pulled something deep inside me. I sat down across from him, letting the moment settle between us. He continued slowly, carefully, choosing each word like it mattered more than the last. He told me he'd been reflecting on his life, on the people who shaped him, on the moments that guided him without him realizing it. And then he said something I wasn't expecting, that our conversations over the years, the ones I thought were simple and casual, meant more to him than I ever knew. I felt a warmth rise in my chest, the kind that comes when someone shows you a part of themselves you never knew you had touched. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet and sincere, the kind of truth that sits gently on your heart and makes you feel both humbled and grateful. Outside, the sky was shifting into early evening, turning the room a soft gold. My nephew leaned back, looking relieved, almost lighter, as if he had finally shared something he'd been carrying alone. And in that moment, I realized that what started as an ordinary visit was slowly becoming something meaningful, a turning point I hadn't anticipated but felt deeply. I didn't yet know where the conversation would lead us, or what he was building up the courage to reveal next. But I could sense that this visit was going to stay with me, not because anything spectacular had happened yet, but because something important had begun to stir beneath the surface, a truth waiting to come into the light. The evening settled around us with a quiet stillness that made every small sound feel amplified. I remember the way the lamp beside the sofa cast a warm glow across the room, softening the edges of everything. It created a gentle cocoon around us, as if the house itself knew we were stepping into a deeper part of the conversation and wanted to hold the moment steady. My nephew took a slow breath, the kind people take when they're gathering courage. He wasn't nervous in a dramatic way, but there was a heaviness in his posture, a weight he had been carrying for too long. I could see it in the way his shoulders curved forward, in the way his fingers tapped lightly against his cup, even though the tea had long cooled. "Auntie," he began, glancing down before meeting my eyes again. "There's something I came here to talk about, something I haven't told anyone." His voice wasn't shaking, but it carried the tone of someone rehearsing honesty for the first time. I leaned in slightly, not pushing, just letting him know I was fully present. The room felt almost suspended, like time had slowed just enough to make space for whatever needed to be said. He explained that over the past year, he had been struggling, not with something dramatic or dangerous, but with a quiet uncertainty about where his life was headed. He felt disconnected from the people around him, unsure of what his next steps should be. He spoke about pressure, expectations, and how sometimes the world felt too loud to make sense of his own voice inside it. As he spoke, I watched his expression soften, as if naming these worries aloud was giving him permission to finally breathe. There was a tenderness in the way he opened up, choosing his words with care, letting them land gently between us. It reminded me of those moments long ago when he was younger and would sit beside me, telling me about school or friends, trusting that I would understand even the parts he struggled to articulate. "You've always been the one person I could talk to without feeling judged," he said quietly. "I didn't come here looking for answers. I just needed someone who knows me." There was a sincerity in his tone that settled deep in my heart. I reached over and placed my hand lightly on his arm, a simple gesture meant to reassure him. He looked up, and for a moment, our eyes held with an unspoken understanding, one shaped by years of family history, shared summers, old stories, and the familiar comfort of knowing someone sees you without needing explanation. The room grew dimmer as dusk turned into night. The shadows shifted across the ceiling in long, soft shapes, and the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between our words. He started recalling moments from his childhood, small things I had almost forgotten. Afternoons baking cookies, evenings when we'd sit on the porch watching the neighbors walk by, times when he'd confide in me about school or friendships. "I didn't realize how much those moments meant until I got older," he admitted. "Back then, I thought they were just regular days. But now, I see they were some of the few times I felt steady." Hearing that stirred something tender in me. Sometimes the simplest memories end up being the anchors that shape us without us realizing it. As he talked, the emotional distance he had been struggling with seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet closeness neither of us had planned for. There was no tension beyond the vulnerability he was sharing, just a slow unfolding of truths he had kept tucked away. When he finally paused, he looked both relieved and contemplative, as if this was only the beginning of what he had come to say. I could feel it too, that his visit held more layers, more meaning, more revelation than the simple family drop in it appeared to be. And in that soft, dimly lit room, with the evening settling fully into night, I sensed that what came next would shift the understanding between us in a way neither of us expected. The night deepened around us, wrapping the house in a calm stillness that made every emotion feel clearer, more honest. I turned on the smaller lamp near the bookshelf, letting its soft light fill the corners without overwhelming the room. My nephew shifted slightly on the couch, no longer tense, but thoughtful, like someone standing at the edge of a truth they weren't sure how to express. For a while, we simply sat there, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where two people are sorting through their thoughts, gathering the courage to speak from the heart. I could tell he hadn't finished. The way he held his breath before exhaling, the way he glanced toward me as if checking whether I was still open to hearing more, it all hinted that the real revelation hadn't yet been spoken. "Auntie," he said finally, his voice quieter, almost hesitant. "There's something else. Something I've been carrying for a long time." I nodded gently, giving him space. I didn't want to rush him or interrupt whatever he was building up to. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, looking down at his hands. When he spoke again, his words came out slowly, weighted with emotion he had clearly kept hidden. "I felt lost for years," he admitted. "I didn't know how to say it without sounding ungrateful or weak, but I kept thinking, maybe if I visited you, maybe if I talked to you, I'd finally understand what's been missing." A quiet warmth spread through me, something between protective concern and a deep sense of responsibility. I never realized he saw me as someone who could help him understand himself, someone he trusted enough to reveal the parts he kept hidden from everyone else. "What do you feel is missing?" I asked softly. He inhaled deeply, eyes lifting to meet mine with a sincerity that felt almost fragile. A sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a feeling that I'm on the right path. His voice wavered just slightly, and when I thought about the people who ever made me feel grounded, you were the first person who came to mind. Those words settled heavily, not in a burdensome way, but in a way that made me realize how much influence simple acts of kindness can have over the years. Memories came rushing back. Times when he spent weekends at my house, the late-night talks on the porch, the way he always seemed calmer around me. I had never seen those moments as anything extraordinary, yet to him, they had become something steady in a world that often felt unsteady. He continued, his voice steadying as he spoke. "When I was younger, I didn't understand why I felt comfortable talking to you about things I couldn't tell anyone else. But I think it's because you listened without trying to change me. You saw me even when I didn't know how to see myself." A quiet emotion rose in my chest, one that felt like pride mixed with tenderness. I hadn't expected his visit to turn into a confession of this depth, but I could sense how important it was for him to say it, how long he'd been waiting to release it. I reached out and placed my hand over his, just for a moment. He didn't pull away. In fact, he seemed to relax, as though that small gesture grounded him again. "You're not alone," I said gently. "You never were. And needing clarity, or comfort, or understanding doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He swallowed hard, and I watched a single relieved breath escape him. Not dramatic, not emotional in a showy way, just real. For the first time that evening, he leaned back against the couch with ease, shoulders no longer tense, face no longer guarded. It was as if he had finally set down a heavy suitcase he'd been carrying far too long. And yet, even in that fragile peace, I felt something else forming beneath the surface, a deeper truth, one he hadn't voiced yet. A truth he was still deciding whether to share. When he looked at me again, his eyes held a new kind of clarity, but also a quiet vulnerability. "Auntie, there's one more thing I need to tell you," he whispered. And in that moment, I knew the real revelation, the one that would shift everything, was still waiting, resting just behind his next breath. He took a long breath, the kind that fills a room before a truth finally steps forward. The lamp's warm light reflected in his eyes, softening the tension that had slowly gathered in the space between us. I stayed quiet, letting him find his own rhythm. There are moments in life when silence becomes the only bridge someone has to cross, and this was one of them. When I said I felt lost, he began, speaking slowly. It wasn't just about career or figuring out my future. His voice wavered slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of honesty. It's about feeling disconnected from myself. I listened closely, sensing the depth of what he was trying to say. "I've spent so much time trying to be what everyone expected," he continued, "trying to be someone who never makes mistakes, never complains, never shows what's really going on." He let out a small, shaky laugh, one filled with self-reflection more than humor. And somehow, pretending became easier than admitting I didn't know who I was becoming. He paused, his gaze lowering as if he wasn't sure how the next part would sound once spoken aloud. "You are the only person I've ever felt fully myself around," he said quietly. "I don't know how or why, but being here, talking to you, it feels like I finally stopped running." His words settled into me like a soft echo. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just deeply real. I could feel the sincerity behind them, the years of bottled-up uncertainty finally finding a place to rest. I kept telling myself I'd figure things out on my own, he said, exhaling slowly. But I realized I didn't need answers. I needed understanding. And I came here because I knew you'd see me, the real me, even the parts I've been avoiding. My heart felt full, heavy with empathy, light with gratitude. I never expected that the simple grounding moments we shared over the years had left such a mark on him. Sometimes we influence someone's life without ever realizing it, simply by being present when they needed it most. I shifted a bit closer, not to overwhelm him, but to let him see I wasn't pulling away from the vulnerability he'd offered. "You're brave for saying this," I told him softly. "Not because these things aren't dramatic, but because they're honest, and honesty can feel heavier than anything." He nodded, eyes glistening. Not tears, just emotion he no longer felt the need to hide. "I don't want to keep pretending anymore," he whispered. "I want to understand myself better. And I think this is the first time I've said that out loud." We sat there in quiet understanding. No tension, no confusion, just two people sharing a moment of truth that shaped the air around us. I reached out and gently squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, grateful and steady. "You're allowed to find yourself at your own pace," I said. "Life doesn't give us a manual. It just gives us moments that help us see who we are. And sometimes those moments happen when we least expect." He took in my words with a deep breath, then let it out slowly. Something in him seemed lighter, as if the revelation he carried had finally found a safe place to land. The heaviness in his voice faded, replaced by a calm sincerity. "Thank you," he murmured, voice warm. "Not just for tonight, but for everything all these years. I didn't realize how much I needed this." Outside, the night settled fully, draping the house in a peaceful quiet. The shadows softened, the air felt warmer, and a gentle sense of closure wrapped itself around us. His visit had begun like any other, casual, ordinary, but it had unfolded into something meaningful, something that brought clarity where confusion once lived. In that final moment, he leaned back with a look of quiet relief, and I knew the revelation he had shared wasn't just about uncertainty. It was about trust, about connection, about finally allowing himself to be seen. And I knew, deep in my heart, that this day would stay with both of us for years to come, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. A reminder that sometimes the most important revelations arrive softly, in the quiet of a living room, between two people who finally understand each other in a new way.